The smallest nation in Western Europe once controlled the largest empire on the planet. A country smaller than the state of Indiana, with a population of barely 10 million, held territory on 4 continents. And this was not centuries of slow expansion. Portugal built this empire in a single generation. That is not exaggeration. That is just what happened. This is the story of how a tiny strip of land at the edge of the Atlantic Ocean accidentally changed every single thing about the modern world. The spices in your kitchen, the language spoken by 300 million people, the brutal birth of the transatlantic slave trade, all of it traces back to one nation's audacious gamble on the unknown. Portugal's story begins long before anyone called it that. Thousands of years ago, ancient hunters roamed the forests of western Iberia. Then, the Celtic peoples arrived, bringing iron tools and building fortified hilltop settlements called castros. Among these tribes, one stood out, the Lusitani, fierce, disciplined, and deeply tied to the land. They gave their name to the region, Lusitania, and that name still echoes today. The entire Portuguese-speaking world is called the Lusophone world because of them. When Roman legions rolled into Iberia in the 2nd century BC, they expected easy conquest. What they got instead was a nightmare named Viriathus. A shepherd turned military genius, Viriathus united the scattered Celtic clans and turned the mountain terrain into a death trap for Roman forces. For 8 years, he waged guerrilla warfare that humiliated Rome's most seasoned generals. Roman armies that had conquered the Mediterranean were being outmaneuvered by a man who had grown up tending sheep in the hills. Rome could not beat him, so they bought his own people. Viriathus's most trusted lieutenants were bribed by the Roman general Capio to assassinate him. They killed him in his sleep. When Rome refused to pay the promised reward, Capio reportedly declared that Rome does not pay traitors. Viriathus was gone, but his legacy, the idea that this land could resist the mightiest empire on earth, that lasted forever. Rome absorbed Lusitania. Latin replaced the Celtic tongues. Roman law replaced tribal custom. And Christianity took root so deeply that by 366 AD, a man of Lusitanian heritage, Pope Damasus I, would sit on the throne of St. Peter in Rome. But empires always fall. In 711 AD, Muslim armies crossed from North Africa and shattered Visigothic power across the Iberian Peninsula in a single devastating campaign. Within years, Islamic rule stretched all the way to the Pyrenees. But in the mountains of Asturias, in the north, Christian resistance flickered to life. The Reconquista had begun. A Galician nobleman named Vimara Perez pushed south in 868, capturing the city of Porto, a port on the western coast. This foothold would grow into something historic. The county of Portugal, named for its chief city, Portus Cale, was born from that single conquest. The pivotal moment arrived in 1139. Count Afonso Henriques, after defeating Muslim forces at the Battle of Arique, did something extraordinary. He did not just win a battle, he declared himself king. Legend tells that Christ himself appeared to Afonso the night before the battle, promising victory and commanding him to found a new kingdom. Whether the vision was real or myth, the result was not. Afonso Henriques became the first king of Portugal. By 1249, the last Muslim stronghold in Portuguese territory had fallen. And here is something remarkable. Portugal's borders were essentially fixed at that point. The oldest unchanged national borders in Europe. While every other nation on the continent spent centuries fighting over territory, Portugal simply stopped. Its destiny, it turned out, was not going to be found on land. It was going to be found on the ocean. Portugal was blocked from expanding east by the Kingdom of Castile. Hemmed in, boxed out, geographically irrelevant, or so it seemed. The only direction left was the Atlantic. That vast, terrifying void that medieval maps filled with sea monsters and boiling oceans. What transformed this geographic trap into a world-changing opportunity was one man, Prince Henry the Navigator. From his compound at Sagres, on Portugal's southwestern tip, Henry orchestrated something that looked less like exploration and more like a revolution. He gathered the finest navigators, cartographers, and shipbuilders in Europe. His engineers developed the caravel, a ship that could sail closer to the wind than anything built before, and his captains pushed further and further down Africa's western coast, one voyage at a time. The breakthrough came in 1434. A captain named Gil Eanes rounded Cape Bovador, a point on the West African coast that no European had ever passed and returned from. Sailors called it the point of no return. They believed the sea literally boiled beyond it. Gil Eanes sailed past it, found calm waters, and came home. When he returned unscathed, a psychological barrier shattered. It was not just geography that had stopped European exploration. It was fear. And fear, it turned out, could be defeated in a single voyage. Portuguese ships pressed south with increasing boldness. They discovered the gold-rich coast of Guinea. They established trading posts. And this is the part that darkens the story permanently. They initiated the European trade in African slaves. Portugal did not just participate in this horror. It started it. In 1488, Bartolomeu Dias rounded the southern tip of Africa, proving the sea route to Asia was real. A decade later, Vasco da Gama completed the journey, reaching India and returning with spices that, by commonly cited accounts, were worth 60 times the expedition's cost. That single voyage announced Portugal's arrival as a global power. Within decades, Portuguese fortresses dotted the coasts of Africa, Arabia, India, and Southeast Asia. Portugal did not just trade with the world. It controlled the world's choke points. Then came 1500. Pedro Alvarez Cabral, on his way to India, made a detour that would reshape the Western Hemisphere. He landed in Brazil. Whether this was truly accidental or secretly planned by the Portuguese crown is still debated by historians. What is not debated is what Brazil became. First valued for its timber, then transformed by vast sugar plantations worked by enslaved Africans, and later enriched by gold and diamond discoveries. That produced wealth beyond anything Europe had seen. By 1520, Portugal controlled an empire spanning 4 continents. Lisbon became Europe's richest city. African gold, Brazilian sugar, Asian spices, it all flowed through one port, one kingdom, one city that had been a backwater a century before. The Tower of Belém, built on the banks of the Tagus River, perfectly captures this golden age. It is a stone fortress shaped like a ship, standing at the edge of Europe, facing the ocean that made Portugal what it was. But here is the thing about empires built on trade. They are fragile, and Portugal's empire was about to shatter. With barely 1 million people at home, Portugal simply did not have the population to settle its vast territories. The wealth flowing through Lisbon created a dependency on colonial profits instead of building domestic industry. Portugal became extraordinarily rich and extraordinarily vulnerable. Disaster struck in 1578. Young King Sebastian, consumed by crusading ambition, led an army into Morocco. At the Battle of Alcácer Quibir, also known as the Battle of the Three Kings, the Portuguese were destroyed. Sebastian vanished in the chaos of battle. His body was never definitively recovered. He left no heir. This single event triggered the end of Portugal as an independent nation. After a brief succession crisis, Philip II of Spain claimed the Portuguese throne in 1580. For 60 years, Portugal was absorbed into the Spanish Empire. Spain's enemies became Portugal's enemies. The Dutch attacked Portuguese possessions worldwide with devastating systematic effectiveness. When Portugal finally clawed back its independence in 1640, its empire was in tatters. The Dutch had seized Ceylon, Malacca, and much of northeastern Brazil. The Golden Age was over. But Portugal refused to disappear. Brazilian gold discoveries in the 1690s produced a second wave of wealth. And then, on All Saints' Day, November the 1st, 1755, Lisbon was hit by one of the most catastrophic natural disasters in European history. An earthquake, followed by fires, followed by a tsunami. It leveled one of the continent's finest cities in minutes. From that destruction rose one of the most remarkable urban rebuilding projects in history. The Marquis of Pombal, an enlightened statesman with enormous political power, rebuilt Lisbon from the ground up with some of the first earthquake-resistant buildings ever constructed in Europe. A city destroyed became a city designed. When Napoleon invaded Portugal in 1807, the Portuguese royal court made an extraordinary decision. Rather than surrender, they fled across the Atlantic to Brazil. Rio de Janeiro became the only European capital ever located outside of Europe. It was a retreat that saved the monarchy but doomed the empire. Brazilians, having governed themselves for years, demanded independence in 1822. Portugal's greatest colony was gone. The 19th century was Portugal's long, painful adjustment from empire to small European nation. The monarchy fell in a Republican revolution in 1910. Political chaos followed. 45 governments in 16 years. Until a military coup in 1926 installed Antonio Salazar as the nation's strongman. Salazar would rule for nearly 5 decades, clinging desperately to Portugal's remaining African colonies as proof that the nation still mattered on the world stage. The Carnation Revolution of 1974 ended everything Salazar had built. Named for the flowers that soldiers placed in their rifle barrels when they refused to fight, it was one of the most peaceful revolutions in modern history. Within 2 years, every African colony Portugal still held gained independence. The empire, what was left of it, was finally completely over. Portugal joined the European Union in 1986. Modernization followed. Prosperity, hard-won, arrived. But here is what makes Portugal's story genuinely haunting, even now. This nation, one of the poorest in Western Europe, ranks among the most peaceful countries on the planet. Portuguese is spoken by more people than German or French. From Brazil's cultural identity to the cuisine of Goa in India, from the architecture of Macau to the very concept of global navigation as we understand it, Portuguese fingerprints are everywhere. The empire is gone, but its shadow covers the entire world. Portugal's story is not really about conquest or gold or spices. It is about what happens when a tiny nation with almost nothing, no armies, no resources, no geographic advantage, decides that the only option left is the impossible, and then does it. If Portugal's rise from the edge of the map to the center of the world blew your mind, you need to see how the Mongol Empire conquered more territory than any civilization in human history, and how they did it in less than a century. That video is right there. Watch it now, and if you are not subscribed yet, this is the kind of history that changes how you see the world. Hit that button. Do not miss what is coming next.